Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how you can save about $2,000 by swapping out your drum brakes for discs and overhauling your entire front suspension here in your driveway. Okay, now what you're looking at here is actually two separate orders. So we've got the drum to disc brake conversion kit, which obviously comes with everything you would need for that. Knuckles, the rotor, dust shields, calipers in the box there. All the small things you need, hoses, bolts. Now that I got from Pirate Jack. It's about $725. One of the cheaper options out there. It does come with the adapters if you wanted to use the stock drum upper control arms, but doing this in my driveway, didn't want to have to deal with pushing and pressing bushings. So the second order is the full front suspension overhaul kit from Dr. Diff. This is about 360 bucks. Comes with the correct disc brake upper control arms, already fully assembled, as you can see. That was one of the major reasons why I got this, so I could just bolt it together and not have to worry about pressing anything in, as well as all the washers and bushings that you would need for the entire front suspension, so steering included. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a quick version on how to get this swapped out in the driveway, all in a single day's worth of work. Okay, now I pretty much use every single tool you see laid out before you. Definitely all the hand tools. Obviously the ratchet set comes with a full kit. I'm not using every single size, but I'd imagine you have something similar. The torch, the hammers, the needle nose pliers, those are some of your absolute go-tos. I would highly suggest getting a pickle fork if you don't have one, because you're most likely going to need it, as well as a PB blaster. Now, looking at the drum here, first thing you're going to have to do is take off that dust cap and pull off the cotter pin so that you can access the castle nut. On this particular car, it was actually a 7/8, but I'm not quite sure if it was the original or not. So you should have a pair of deep sockets or a set of deep sockets all the way up to 1 1/4 inches in your garage. If you don't, I highly suggest getting it. That 1 1/4 inches you're going to need for your crankshaft bolt. Once you get the drum off, clean it up a little bit, get a lot of grease everywhere. There's 4 bolts holding the back plate and the rest of the brake assembly onto the spindle. You can get 3 of them, but the 4th one, you got to kind of tear apart the brakes a little bit to get to. So this was a 3/4 on this car. I'm not sure what exactly size yours will be, but if you have the deep socket, wrench all the way up to 1 inch, you'll have no problem getting it off. So once I got that off, I just ended up cutting the brake line because I'm not going to use it. I've got new ones. And once I've got everything cleared away, it allowed a lot more access to the bolts. So I just completely drenched them all in PB Blaster. I'd actually been doing this to the hardline brake nuts for the actual hoses for about 3 days, just trying to get them loosened. Now, going up to the top of the upper control arm, these 2 bolts are called the Camber Bolts. Obviously, they adjust camber. I just got them loose. They have the nuts on the outer edges, and the bolts actually slide through from the inner portion where the shock is at. They can be kind of a pain to get out, so I'd highly suggest using some rubber mallets. And then worst case scenario, if you still can't get them out, you don't want to damage the threads. In my case, I'm going to reuse them. You're going to need to adjust the right height, which is that single bolt underneath the lower control arm, which you can use with an impact gun. And that really allows you to move that upper control arm so that you can wedge those bolts out and get them free and clear. Now, with these ball joints, I typically like to go straight for the torch. I don't want to waste all day trying to get these out. I know some people will use screwdrivers and wedge them, or just go straight for the pickle fork. It just doesn't work for me. One of the methods you can do is taking 2 hammers and smacking the housing on either sides to kind of knock that ball joint loose. Sometimes that'll work. I've only had that happen 1 time on this car. Most of the other times it was quite a long time with some heat. Basically just lit the whole thing on fire, expanded the metal around the ball joint, and then finally, after a few smacks with a pickle fork, was able to break it free. Now, the kit that I got from Dr. Diff actually comes with new inner and outer tie rods, as well as that adjustment sleeve. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this one off here, making sure not to change the settings that it's at currently, because I'm going to measure the distance between Zerk fittings on the inner and outer tie rods when I reassemble the new parts for reinstallation. So, torch, pickle fork, makes this job pretty easy. Now, after getting everything cleaned up and actually painted a little bit, I'm just going to go ahead and start reassembling the new parts. I'm reusing those camber bolts, so I'm making sure to clean the threads thoroughly with a wire brush. I'm also putting a little bit of grease on them just so that they don't get nicked when I'm pushing them through. I also want to make sure it's easy to get that nut back on, as it's kind of a pain to get a wrench back there. Now I'm just going to reinstall these camber bolts in the same orientation as I took them out, which is bolt on the very top end of that oddly shaped washer. You'll see it when you take it out. But I'm not going to go ahead and torque them. I'm going to leave them just snug with a wrench, as after I get this whole thing assembled, I'm going to take it to an alignment shop and have the professionals take a look at it, make sure I'm safe going down the road. All right, now the next step is going to be to install that lower ball joint. It already comes pre-assembled, which makes it way easier for you to do in the garage or the driveway like I'm doing here. Once I've got it tightened, I just make sure I give it a few turns to where it's snug but not too tight. Just want to make sure I can get that cotter pin in there, bend it around as you see here. And then once the lower ball joint is installed, it's time to go ahead and bolt on the spindle. Now, be careful when you're doing this. Make sure you bolt the bolts or install the bolts from the outer edge of the spindle nut on the back end. If you do that in reverse and have the nuts where the spindle portion is at, it's going to restrict the movability of the rotor and grind, and obviously you don't want that. So bolts got to go in from the front. I'm just going to go ahead and tighten these as tight as I can with the wrench, not trying to break them. Just trying to get them to where I feel comfortable. They're not going to fall off when I'm going down the road. Now, when it comes time to actually installing that upper ball joint, you're going to have to use something to raise that lower. And so I'm just using my floor jack, push it up position to where I can actually get the upper in. I had that cover on there, so if you do have that, make sure you pull it off. As you see here, once you get that cover off, it makes it pretty easy to install that upper ball joint. I am putting a small thin layer of grease on the rubber that contacts the metal. I don't want it to rip or anything, just giving it that lubrication that it needs. And then just like the lower ball joint, once I've got that castle nut on, I'm just making it snug. I'm not trying to tighten it too much. I need these parts to move. I just want to make sure I can get that cotter pin in. So don't try to over tighten it to where the cotter pin hole is not even within the castle nut prongs. Just make sure it's snug there and the cotter pin works. So after that's installed, you're going to have to install that dust shield. There's only 3 bolts to do so. It comes in the hardware kit. Just get them snug. You don't need to really torque them down too tight. And then after that dust shield is on, you can go ahead and throw the caliper on with the 2 bolts installed from the back. All right, now it's time to assemble the rotor. It's gonna have inner and outer bearings as well as a seal, which you see here. I just packed them by hand, got them full of grease, ready to go. Okay, so I got into kind of a hurry here. Wasn't able to record, just putting the rotor on and the caliper. One of the things I wanted to talk about was in this kit, you know, once you've got the rotor back onto the spindle, you know, you saw the two bearings we had there, the inner bearing with the seal and the outer bearing. Of course, the outer bearing is going to want to kind of fall out when you're pushing this on, so just kind of guide it there. Once you've got it slid on, then you'll see like this strange washer. It's kind of behind here. You can't really quite tell from this, but that golden washer back there has got a notch in it, and that notch is only going to go in the one location on the spindle, so you can't miss it. Once you've got that there, then there's a bolt. It is not a cast on that bolt like you would expect, just a standard bolt. So you'll tighten it till you don't have much play left on here. You still want to be able to move it, but that's about it. Some people will tighten it to where you can't move it and then back it off a quarter turn on that nut. You know, it's your preference. I just want to be able to make sure I can move it with my hand, and that's about it. So then once you've got that tightened, you'll throw this little cap on here, just slides right over. It allows you to use the cotter pin. So I've got a cotter pin in here, wrapped it around, and that's good to go. Once you've got this rotor back on, you can put the caliper on. This is the same setup they've used for quite a long time. My 78 Trail Lister had the exact same one. You've got your outer and inner pads located in there. You basically just slide it on, sandwich it in between the bracket, and then you've got these metal clips that bolt to the top and to the bottom here. And that really holds it in place. So that's about it for finalizing this setup here. You know, once you've got that casted on there, they do give you dust caps. So just throw it on here, give it a few love taps with a rubber mallet. So it's good to go. And then you can throw your wheel on and see how it sits. Once you've got the wheel on, you set it down, you'll be able to tell a little bit where you're at with your homemade alignment. What I did was I took the new inner outer tie rods as well as the adjusting rod here. I measured it compared to the old one, made sure it was the exact same, and then threw it on. It was a little bit off as far as the alignment, so I tweaked it. And of course the camber bolts up there, you know, those two bolts, I've got it kind of a pretty bad camber at the moment, but it's safe enough for me to go to the shop and have them do a full alignment. So you will notice that in this particular setup, I've got a brake line coming up. Didn't want that. That was because these old steel brake lines are just kind of flimsy, and this one snapped off right at the top. Wasn't enough for me to continue using it from the top, so I just put it into the bottom. And I do have some chafing gear here, so it's not too bad.